Hello, my name is Mike Ward, and I'm the Global Head of Life Sciences and Healthcare Thought Leadership at Clarivate, a provider of solutions and tools for those engaged in research to help them accelerate their innovation efforts. The theme on Helix this year is new medicines in a brave new world. And I'm delighted to be joined for this fireside chat by Fiona Marshall, who is a highly experienced drug hunter with experience across both biotech and big pharma. Fiona is currently the Senior Vice President and Global Head of Discovery, Sciences, Preclinical Development and Translational Medicine at MSD, and so is ideally placed to talk about this topic. So thanks for joining us, Fiona.
Hello, Mike. Great to be here and look forward to talking to you today.
So to kick off, if we sort of look back 4 years, when the UK life sciences sector was fretting over the potential impact of the Brexit referendum, and how it might sort of affect the global influence and development of the life sciences community here in the UK, MSD confirmed its confidence in the UK's research base by picking London as the location of its European research hub. As you're in charge of the establishment of that London hub, I thought it'd be good to sort of kick off if you could just give us an update on the progress that has been made since then.
Yeah, no, 4 years seems a lifetime ago now, and so much has obviously happened since then. But actually, MSD had been planning a discovery site in London for many years before that. Actually long before Brexit talks even started. And that's really part of our strategy to have new research sites in locations where we can attract the best talent and also collaborate with the local life science ecosystem. So, these sites allow us to bring together scientists of different disciplines. And the idea is to sort of have a more intimate, collaborative and entrepreneurial environment. So make those sites more biotech-like than a pharma, but still able to connect through to all that the pharma company has to offer. And so to that end, we've already established new sites in Cambridge, Massachusetts, as well as in South San Francisco. And then the UK was going to be the third, or is the third location. And London was chosen as being, really connected centre that could allow us to link through to, Cambridge, Oxford, really the rest of the UK as well as Europe, and to then, access talent and partners through that location. So I actually joined MSD in 2018 to head up and start up that site. And I was keen that we would get our operations going as quickly as possible while we were also looking for the new permanent location. So we were fortunate to be able to set up laboratories within the Francis Crick Institute, as well as at the London Business Innovation Centre. And so we currently employ about 50 lab-based staff. And the initial focus is on mechanisms of aging that lead to disease. We've got as well a strong translational medicine team, which are based in Europe that have members in London. They contribute to running our experimental medicine studies, first time in human clinical studies, as well as later stage development. And again, the UK and Europe really sort of excel at these types of clinical studies. Now, while this is going on, obviously, we're working on where our future permanent home will be in central London. We've announced that we're working with Preclinical. They are the developers of Belgrove House, which is close to King's Cross Station. It's still subject to all the planning processes and legal processes. So, that's something that we're working on at the moment.
All right. So you mentioned that there are other hubs, Massachusetts and in San Francisco, which are clearly the sort of the hotspots or the super clusters for the sort of the biotech world. I just wondering that how do these hubs and the London hub, how do they actually fit within the MSD ecosystem? And to what extent is the focus of the research that will be done at these places? How much does it align with the existing pipeline and portfolio ambitions of MSD, compared with, say, doing stuff that is, in a, totally different from MSD's focus?
Yeah, so, the London Discovery Centre, and this is also our other research sites, they all have their own areas of focus. So I mentioned London at the moment is, mechanisms of aging. South San Francisco is cardiometabolic disease. Cambridge is focusing on sort of early new target discovery and platforms that enable that. So each of these then feed in ultimately to identifying new drug targets and opportunities, and then therapeutic candidates that form part of the MSD portfolio. So the London Discovery Centre already has an excellent pipeline of projects related to mechanisms of aging, things like mitochondrial function, autophagy, those sorts of pathways. And some of these are advancing through our MSD portfolio. Now, all of these sites really act in an interconnected network of activities and capabilities. So they don't duplicate big things like high throughput screening or cryo-EM. Those are not on all of the sites. In London, we've got wet lab work going on around disease biology, medicinal chemistry, and pharmacology. And then we have staff who are experts in other areas like DMPK, and they then connect through to colleagues that are operating on the main sites. And in terms of what we work on, each of the different hubs comes up with its own ideas for targets and proposals, and they then discuss that with the relevant stakeholders, which could be the therapeutic area head, for example, in the MRL network. Now, as we grow the site in London, then we're going to be adding in other sort of biology areas of focus, and we're sort of discussing what those might be right now.
So how do you go about sort of selecting which areas you're actually therefore going to work on? You sort of say, right, okay, it's sort of that neuroscience, that sort of aging sort of focus, but sort of specific projects. What does that process look like?
Yeah, so when I first joined, I was actually fortunate. One of the reasons that I accepted the job is I was given a fairly blank sheet of paper on what the London site could work on. And I spent about the first 6 months going around visiting all of the MSD sites globally, finding out what people were working on and looking for gaps in opportunities, as well as what I felt was the most exciting sort of emerging science, and where obviously unmet sort of patient need was. And that is why I luckily personally was able to decide that mechanisms of aging I thought would be a really interesting area. Lots of innovative science emerging in that whole area of geroscience, and how aging and loss of homeostasis contributes to so many diseases. What we wanted the site to be was what we call disease agnostic, so not just a neuroscience site, but we wanted it to do some neuroscience. And obviously aging mechanisms actually contribute to so many different diseases. Initially, the focus is on neurodegeneration, but many of the pathways and targets that we're working on, also are relevant in other diseases of aging. So cardiometabolic disease, for example, and even oncology. And then we have therapeutic area heads for each of the disease areas. And then when you start a project, you go and, quite a lot of work gets done. We're quite light on governance at the earlier stages of the process. So, work can be done by lab scientists exploring projects. And then when it gets to a certain threshold where you need a lot more resources, you then go to the therapeutic area group and say, can I have some more resources to work on this?
Okay, so that's kind of interesting. So what you're saying is people can sort of work on a project. When it gets to a sort of a critical stage and they need to ask for money, resources, etc., that's when it gets more formalized. So what has actually happened at that point? What sort of stage in the sort of translational story are we sort of talking about, where it's going from being a project to actually being a program?
Yeah, so what we do, if you think we've got a new target, this could have come out of genetics, for example, a genetic link. You've got a number of different questions. What is the strength of that target to the disease? Does it apply to just a small number of people who might have that mutations or that genetic? Could it be the broader population? And then, another big question is is it druggable? And also, how are you going to drug it? Is it a small molecule target? Is it an antibody target? And a good example of this is TREM2, which is a protein on microglia, which we know has genetic connections to Alzheimer's disease. But it's a complex protein, and when that genetic link came up, we didn't really understand how it functioned, how it regulated microglia, or how you would drug it. Is it a small molecule, druggable, or is it an antibody? So these are all the sorts of questions that you're trying to answer. So teams work together to try and address these, and they can do some early sort of hit finding work to see, run a small screen, this sort of thing, set up assays, and that work can all go on, without too much sort of approval or governance. And at the point where you then want to run a full high throughput screen, you want to do more in vivo work, then you start to go and say, right, this is the time I need more authorization to do this. And at the point where you actually have a concept of a proper drug discovery program. So at that point, you've got, what your modality is going to be. You might say, right, this is definitely a small molecule. We want an allosteric modulator of an enzyme or whatever. And what the patients would look like. And you also know what your assay protocol, we call it the research operating plan. So what are the assays that you're going to use at what stages to take this forward? You want to be in a position where you've got a line of sight to your candidate. That's the point where it sort of gets formally taken into the MSD portfolio.
Right. So, you mentioned, one of the reasons why the MSD decided, okay, London, and as you say, you're in Massachusetts, you're in San Francisco, and that is where there are already sort of, established, clusters or ecosystems that are able to support sort of translational science into medicine. I was just wondering, how do you envisage the hub is going to interact with other stakeholders, either sort of in the British ecosystem or across continental European life science ecosystems? And who are you most interested in working with? And
yeah, so one of the reasons for establishing these new hubs is to reach out to the local researchers, and that's both in academia as well as in the biotech sector. And in some cases where we identify areas of interest, we proactively reach out to either companies working in those areas or academic groups that are working in those areas, and we ask them if they would like to collaborate. And that's already working very well with the London Centre. We've already got collaborations both through, we've got postdocs and PhD students in many UK universities. And then we also have a business development team who I'm sure many on this call will know. That team are very proactive. They go out and meet with companies in the biotech sector. As you know, that's done through partnering meetings like on Helix, as well as contacting directly with those companies. And of course, we do encourage companies to come and connect directly with us if they think, we would be a good partner for their work. And, we're always on the lookout for interesting science that can lead to great drugs. And that could be because of companies have novel platform capabilities, or it could be that they've identified new biology that then needs drugging. And we collaborate at all different stages, both early on where we can bring our own drug discovery capabilities to transform that novel biology into therapeutics, or we can work with companies who've already got drug candidates that we then bring into our clinical development and then ultimately manufacturing and take those through to market.
Right. So it's actually almost like across the sort of the spectrum, because I was thinking, okay, so how would these collaborations be structured? But it sounds like it's like a case-by-case basis. I mean, could you give us some examples of
we literally do like? All shapes and sizes. We have collaborations where it's literally one PhD student all the way through to having 50 people in a biotech company that we're funding. So it is all shapes and sizes.
All right. And in terms of sort of your engaging, I mean, you sort of said that you guys, you've got your outreach going out looking for opportunities, etc. What's the opportunity though for somebody to come and just knock on your door and sort of saying, hey, we've got something that we think is just right up your street, and we would like to have a discussion? What would they have to have in their bag to be able to get you to open the door?
Well, I mean, first of all, the door's always open for anyone to contact us. So even if it's just a concept or anything, and people do contact both our business development team, me, or other members of my team on a regular basis. I mean, literally every day with ideas and concepts. And, usually we can say, well, this is interesting, or maybe this is not an area that we work on, but we'd like to see, you move to this stage, and then we will be interested in. And again, there's no single answer to what we would be most interested in. It's just something that's complementary to what we're doing and that we think is exciting and, novel. We can't do it ourselves, or we're not doing it ourselves. And, that we really are open to anything like that. This idea of being disease agnostic, we have disease areas of particular interest. Oncology, of course, especially in immunotherapy, but we have a very strong pipeline in there already, so there's a high barrier of entry in that area. Neuroscience, we work broadly across neurodegenerative diseases as well as pain and psychiatry still. Cardiometabolic disease, we're particularly interested in, NASH and liver disease, as well as cardiovascular disease we're still interested in, and also ophthalmology. Immunology is another area, autoimmune diseases. And then, we have a long-term standing in infectious disease, HIV, antivirals, as well as vaccines. So those are our main areas of focus and research that we would probably be most interested in. But, outside that as well, we do bring in things that are not in our core sort of areas of internal research.
Right. So you mentioned in answer to an earlier question, sort of like the multidisciplinary approach to discovery, where you talked about sort of biologists and chemists, etc. I just wondered if you could sort of expand on actually how diverse that multidisciplinary approach will be, and are there disciplines which would be considered non-traditional for the pharma industry, disciplines that you would like to co-opt into, I guess, your innovation efforts?
Yeah, so all science now is, and particularly drug discovery, has to be done in a large multidisciplinary team, and that combines internal expertise within the company as well as working with collaborators, as we've just said. And that includes, biotech sector, academia, but also CROs. And the UK again has some very, leading good CROs that we work with. In fact, the UK is leading in many areas that we are sort of tapping into that are not standard, if you like. The sort of high throughput genome sequencing, genome sciences, and particularly we've seen how the UK has been leading in SARS-CoV-2 sequencing. So that's one area where incredible amounts of data, so data and analytics across the board of the life science sector, it is particularly important, and adding in sort of machine learning and AI to that. The NHS, of course, is an incredibly unique repository of data, and part of I'm on the UK Life Sciences Industrial Strategy Board, and part of that is to facilitate interactions between the sectors, and including the NHS within that, to see how we can make the most of that sort of data, and that includes doing long, very longitudinal cohort studies. So a new initiative is called Our Future Health, which is about prevention, early diagnostics. And again, being in the UK, we're well positioned now to connect into these sorts of activities. The other area which I mentioned early on is the translational pharmacology, experimental medicine, those early clinical trials. And again, in the COVID scenario, the UK, I think, has been a bit of a leader in doing, very interesting studies like challenge models, for example. So those are things that are not standard, and I think the UK has a real opportunity to be taking the lead on.
So being in charge and sort of, establishing the London hub, I mean, there's a lot of resource and investment that has been put into that. I'm just sort of thinking, when you're then sort of talking to the board at MSD, what have you promised that that the London hub's going to deliver? What's success going to look like?
Yeah, so success is going to be measured how we always measure success in the industry. It is about delivering breakthrough medicines to patients. In the shorter term, it's about delivering differentiated candidates into the pipeline that are going to be innovative, but also have a high possibility of success. And that's through de-risking activities that we would be doing, such as validating targets. But there are other aspects that contribute to measures of success. So establishing collaborations, making connections that MSD wouldn't have done otherwise. And another important factor for me is training up the next generation of scientists. That's why we're very keen on having students come and people doing internships and work experience. Really, I think the pharma industry, particularly in the UK, has had a history of training up incredible entrepreneurs that have then gone out and set up biotech companies. So we really must try and maintain that sort of system. The other thing, which is again important, especially being in central London, is about being a good neighbour in the community. And we're engaging widely now in tailoring sort of educational outreach. The one idea is that we could have a sort of classroom within the building that children from local schools come to and can experience sort of science in that building and connect with real sort of scientists. So an important measure of success is that we make a meaningful contribution to the local communities as well.
You mentioned that at the moment your activities, sort of the Francis Crick Institute, etc. So when you eventually move out, is that going to be a bit of a challenge, and sort of what relationship do you have with those institutes?
Oh yeah, well we're very privileged to be in the Francis Crick Institute. It's a fantastic location. It's a beautiful building, and it's full of incredibly brilliant scientists who every day are coming up with new discoveries. So we have a deep research collaboration with them. So we're working in partnership, and that's also jointly funded by the Medical Research Council. So we have those strong interactions. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to stay in central London is that we could still maintain interactions with groups like the Francis Crick. So even when we move, then I'm sure we're going to be carrying on collaborating and working together very closely. And we're already talking about ways that we might do that. We're doing joint initiatives, going back to the educational outreach. We're actually doing some joint initiatives around that as well at the moment.
And you mentioned about the sort of you're being a good neighbour or being part of the community. I mean, one sort of stakeholder are in fact the sort of the patients and the carers. And there is a movement within the sort of the pharmaceutical industry or the life sciences sector to try to be more genuinely patient-centric. I'm just thinking in the sort of this very, very early stage discovery phases, how easy is it for you to ensure that the voice of the patient is both heard and listened to?
Yeah, this is a really important point, Mike. I'm really glad you mentioned this. So, I have to say that MSD has always, been patient-centric. Was one of the things that attracted me to the company. It really lies at the heart of what we do as a company, and we've got a long history of collaborating with patient organisations, health-related charities as well. And we embrace the chances to engage directly with individual patients, with patient advocacy organisations and their caregivers, as you mentioned. And really it's to try and understand their sort of needs, their healthcare journey, if you like, and bring that understanding into the company and into the bench scientists who are, working and coming up with new targets. Because quite often scientists can come up with targets that seem really cool biology, but then you just think, well, actually, how is this going to help the patient? And it's true that there are a lot of gaps in patient care. Of course, there's this is all moving goalposts because there's changes to health policy in areas like that we work in, such as vaccination, oncology, in HIV and other chronic conditions. So, there is a really compelling need for our industry to work more closely with patients and their caregivers and the patient organisations. We've got to better understand outcomes from a patient's point of view, and also importantly improve access to the therapies, because there's no good in us doing all cool science that produces new drugs and then patients don't actually get to have those until many years down the line. Another thing which is important is we're really committed now to being inclusive in the participation of our research, so in terms of diversity of the people that we have working, that we collaborate with, but also in our clinical trials, for example, that reflect the diversity of society. And with regard to clinical trials, we're also now committed, and I think there's a big increase in transparency of clinical trials, so that data is released in a much more timely manner. And again, in the COVID setting, we've seen that really successfully, very transparent release of data. And I hope that that's carried over, and we're certainly committed to carrying over to publish clinical data, whether it's positive or negative. Another area which is important with regard to patients is sort of health literacy, and making sure that we talk in terms that everybody can understand across all of the range of health literacy levels. And again, I think that the country's health literacy has actually gone up again, and everybody now knows what RNA vaccines are, which I think nobody would have even known about a few years ago. Within the company, this really is the whole area of patient representation is important. So we do have a chief patient officer, and their responsibility is to represent the company globally on any patient-related matters, and to go out and engage with patients and their patient-related organisations, so that we can bring those perspectives into the company.
Great, but Fiona, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thanks for taking the time to speak to us today. If we had an audience at this point, I'd be asking them to show their appreciation of your contribution by applause, but we're just going to have to imagine it virtually until we get to see each other again in person. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Mike.
Again,
Must admit, I much prefer talking to a live audience, but it's been great talking to you today. So thank you very much.